Let's look at the basics of titling in this tutorial. To add a title in its simplest form, simply select a clip, go to FX, and then choose under Image, Title. And we'll double click on the title effect to get to the visual editor. As with a number of areas of Mistika, title has its own dedicated interface, and those dedicated interfaces are taken from this options bar. So in this case I'll press title. The title effect in Mistika is a relatively simple title generator. The idea is that we simply type text into this entry area down here and we see the result on our visual editor. We can fine-tune the position of titles by dragging within the visual editor, but all other controls occur down here. So starting on the left we have our list of typefaces. The typeface will be applied to whatever is selected. The typefaces themselves are easy to install. Essentially, if you locate the folder on your system where typefaces are installed, and in most cases it's simply user share fonts Mistika, then Mistika will read pretty much all TrueType and OpenTypeface files. So installing a new typeface is as simple as just copying it into this folder. If you do add new typefaces, the only thing to remember is you just need to press this once. As you can see, it just rereads that folder and populates this list. You only need to do that if you've added new typefaces. The functions on this side give us some control over the attributes of the title. So let's just type some more in. So firstly we have font size. Whatever I have selected I can just drag up and down to change the font size. And also have some presets here. One thing to be aware about with the sizes in the title effect are that the sizes are pixel sizes as opposed to percentage of screen width. So if you type some titles in, then change your resolution and go back to your project, you'll find your title sizes will probably have changed because they are still the same height in pixels, which might make them a different proportion of your new screen resolution. Moving downwards we also have kerning. Kerning is the gap between characters. And again some presets for them. Leading is the distance between lines. So for example, if I put my cursor on the second line and make an adjustment, it's changing the gap between lines. And again some presets. Then slant angle is a way of getting an italic effect if your typeface doesn't have it normally. So I'll select the characters that I want to affect and I can just drag around. I can change the alignment of either a line that I'm currently on if I haven't anything selected, or everything that I've selected. And these work in tandem with positional controls. So for example, this has now aligned everything to the left, but I've offset everything to the right. So be a little aware of this, because if you now press center, the center now has the offset. To clear the offset, just quickly jump out of this interface and you'll see under the parameters there's a move X. You can just delete it and then you'll know you'll be back in the center. We can turn a page of text into a roller or a crawler. So for example, pressing roll up, just take that offset off so it doesn't go to one side. So pressing roll up has created a roller. In essence, what this button has done is it's worked out what animation needs to be placed in Y in order to get from exactly just off the bottom of the screen to exactly just off the top of the screen. And we can see that animation in the graphs. If again we quit this interface, pop-up curves, and we can see we have an animation there, which of course we can go and edit and change if we want to. Of course, to make the roll faster or slower, all we need to do is extend the effect in the timeline, because that animation will have been stretched accordingly. Similarly, the crawl left and right will put an animation into the X curve. We can load and save text. The difference between text and formatted is load text will just load unformatted text from a standard ASCII file, .txt file, whereas save formatted will save all the attributes that you've added in here. One trick that's worth knowing about in Linux is how you can copy and paste between text windows. For example, if I reopen this browser, wherever I select, if I then press the middle mouse button in a different text window, I will get that as a copy. So this is quite a good way of stealing bits of text out of documents. And actually it works across Linux in pretty much any text input. If we quit the interface, we'll have a look at the parameters we have here. Again, these are standard parameters all linked to a graph, so they can all animate as you need. At the moment it still has the roller animation in, which is from the move Y here. I'm just going to delete that so it's static. So firstly, under color, we can change the color of the type. We could switch to an easier interface to do that if we wanted to on here. Level is what you'd animate to affect a fade up or down. You see it's a level of transparency. The page of type can also be rotated in 3 dimensions, so rotating in X, or in Y, or in Z, or possibly even Z. Wide is a value that simulates how wide the lens is. So if I were to rotate this around, a wide angle lens would have a slightly different effect than a telephoto lens. It's a value that allows you to play with the effects of wide angle. Zoom X and Y, they work as expected, but in fact they don't work by blowing up the pixels that have been generated by the type generator. Rather, they enlarge the vectors before the type is drawn. So the result is we can zoom in very close without seeing any aliasing. Move X and Y we've seen. Center X and center Y provide the axes of rotation. Samples is a quality control. If I zoom in on my visual editor, if I drop the samples down to 1, you can see a noticeably lowering in quality. And the higher you go, the better quality the rendering, but potentially with an impact on processing speed. Arcs allows you to change how many divisions there are within the vector drawing. So again, if I zoom in really close, we can just begin to see in this E some straight lines appearing in the curve. You can just see in there that's not a smooth curve. Increasing the arcs will give you a better curve. You rarely need to touch this. This is only if you're going to get very, very close onto some of these letters. Reveal is a value that you can animate, and effectively it allows you to do a type on effect. So for example, if I wanted this title to type on, an animation curve would look something like this. Set the first value to 0, and then perhaps 20 frames later to 100, and now on playback that would type the type on over 20 frames. Gaps in X is a value that you can animate as well to give you that sort of effect. Likewise in Y, animated line spacing effectively. The size is a size per character value that you can animate. Then angle is the italic effect we looked at. And finally, we can choose whether we're applying the title to the image as we are now, or to the alpha channel. As we can see at the moment, we're viewing RGB, which is the picture channel. And if we were to look at the alpha channel for this shot, we can see it's blank white. On the other hand, if we change this to mask, so we're applying the text to the masks channel, or the alpha channel, then you can see that on our picture channel the text has disappeared, but it actually has bonded itself to the alpha channel. You'll note a reasonably glaring omission here, and that is that we don't have any control to put a shadow on this text. The historical reason is that the title effect has generally been used to generate white type on a black background, and then use the compositing tools within Mistika to do any other cool effect we feel the need to do. And in fact, a shadow is probably a bit of a hangover of that. So we haven't done a tutorial yet on compositing, but let's look at some limited aspects of it to see how we might use those tools when we're titling. So I'm going to go back to the timeline, and I'm going to set up something different. I'm going to put the title underneath like this. So now, because the title isn't connected to anything, it's just generating white on black. But in fact, what I'd rather it did is to put this into the alpha channel. So now what it's doing is it's generating a pure white frame, and then in the alpha channel it's generating the text. The reason is that this will look better when it's keyed, because otherwise we're likely to see some anti-alias dark edges on the type. Then to complete our composite, we simply go to Effects and choose this function, Comp 3D. For the time being, ignore the 3D part of it. It doesn't necessarily mean stereoscopic 3D, it simply means that it's a compositing environment that's aware of depth, aware of Z depth. But for now, we're going to use it very simply as a compositor. So by double-clicking the top line and looking back at our visual channel, we can see we've affected a composite. And this is a standard layout in Mistika, that we take a background and we sandwich it between something that has an alpha channel and something that can composite, which is almost always the Comp 3D. Now the Comp 3D has a million functions because it's the key compositing environment to Mistika. Right now we're going to ignore all of that and just look at this one, Shadow. So if I open up Shadow, we have some reasonably easy to understand parameters. So the first one is intensity, turn it up to full. We can change the offset. We can change the radius of the blur, so it's a soft shadow, and we can choose what type of blur it is. At the moment it's quite a boxy blur, which you can probably see by the squarish shape, which is fast to process but not quite so pretty. So we can switch to a Gaussian blur, which is a lot smoother and softer. The other function we have here is spread, which pushes the shadow outwards, basically makes it more intense in the middle of the blur. So spread and blur radius work together. And of course we have our color chooser for the shadow if we want to change that. And as wherever in Mistika you get to set a color, if you want to press this and then you can choose it as you need. And just while we're in this interface, if you ever do need to pick a color from the screen, the way it works is simply tap down onto pick color, keep it pressed down, go and find the color you want, release, and that will give you the color grab. Just going to delete the shadow for the time being, go back to the timeline. So this basis of setting up a title does allow us to make much better use of the other effect tools within Mistika. For example, if I insert in here a blur and go to the blur parameters, you'll notice at the moment if I change the value of the blur, it doesn't appear to be doing anything. The reason for that is that currently we're blurring the picture channel RGB. Well, we'll recall that the picture channel, as we can see here from title, is just a plain white field, and a blurred plain white field is much the same as a sharp plain white field. So in fact what we must do is blur the alpha channel, and now we can see that we can pull focus on the type, which again of course we could animate within our curves. Or perhaps a useful one for designing type transitions is the anamorphic function. On 0 we're assuming that we want to blur in all directions evenly. If I put it to one extreme, you can see that actually it's only blurring now horizontally. So we can use this sort of process to have an animated streak on. So for example, we might have a look at our curves, switch on our auto key, and we'll start with a large amount of blur, and 20 frames later bring the blur down. So now we have this as an animation. But of course if this is a transition on, we're also going to need the type to fade up, otherwise it's just going to cut on looking like that. So if you go to our title, we have level here, so we can just insert a keyframe on frame 20, which we remember is the frame where the title comes sharp, 0 at the beginning, and then we have a fade on as well. As we look more at compositing in Mistika, we'll be able to investigate more all the things that we can do with many of the effects in here that relate to making type interesting. For example, if I just bring in another random shot, strip away the audio, don't need that. I'm going to attach the title to this. So now the title isn't generating white anymore, it's generating this image, but still our titles are on the alpha channel. So now when we composite, we can see we're cutting out one picture and keying it over another. And then perhaps in here, just as a taster of the sort of palette of effects that are available, perhaps we'll take a bump map, which is now going to give our types a 3D look. So changing the amplitude and the lighting. Or perhaps instead we could give it a liquid look. So you can see how the possibilities open up when you switch to this method of using the title simply to generate an alpha channel and not much more, and then letting Mistika's effects ability give us the palette we need to make interesting type.